Welcome to our introduction to innovative thinking for fast changing times. Hi, I'm Andy Simon, and we put together a series of videos to help you, CEOs, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, business experts out there who are all trying to adapt to the post COVID-19 period of reentry, economic restoration, and beginning to find about how to run your business in innovative ways. Sometimes we need new ways to think about things. It's all the ambiguity that's making us uncomfortable. And as we put this together, we asked CEOs what were the problems that they were facing. So our job today is to bring you two experts on how to think about these. One is that fear of failure. CEOs were looking in the mirror, uncertain about where to take their organizations, and they are afraid. CEOs aren't supposed to be. People look to them to really lead them forward, but there's no certainty. HR directors are fatigued, and they're telling us, not quite sure how to build wellness, which benefits really matter. How can I really make sure my employees are getting what they need when they're all living remotely? Remote workers are depressed, they're lonely, they're anxious, they're stressed, they have heartbreak, they're not quite sure what's going on. But we know that loneliness has all kinds of physical things that accompany it, and it's not healthy. We have to take care of ourselves. So we're going through a transformation that's really affecting everybody, our families, our friends, our colleagues, our employees, and our business clients. So now what will we do? So I brought you today two brilliant guys who I just enjoy working with. So Apostolopoulos. Khan will introduce himself. And I laugh because I study Greek and I love Greek. I did my research in Greece. But Khan is here to help you really develop the kind of business that will come out of this recession in soar. Khan is a change management expert, and he works with all kinds of organizations to really help them rethink the way they are organized and how to get things done. He is co-author of a book that we'll talk about today. It was written with Dr. Elia Gourgouris called 7 Keys to Navigating a Crisis, and I'm going to urge you to buy it. It's really important. And he's the founder and he runs Fresh Biz Solutions. It's an HR consulting business, but it also gets to the crux of the problems that we're looking at and how to begin to resolve them. And Dr. Elia Gourgouris is also my delicious friend who is here to help you begin to think about this as a psychologist might. Dr. Elia is the founder of the Happiness Center, and he's got a wonderful award-winning book on happiness. And he too is a co-author of the 7 Keys to Navigating Crisis. But it's a time now for us to help you really think about this in new ways. Dr. Elia is an international speaker, and it's a time for him to speak to all of us here who are really trying to think through how we're going to restore the kind of wonderful life that we had before we began this. So thank you for joining me, gentlemen. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Elia to begin with how do we begin to address ambiguity and change and the fear of failure and all the emotional things that are happening. And then Khan is going to help us figure out how to take Dr. Elia's ideas and turn them into how-tos so we have actionable things. There's a Monday syndrome that I always talk about. And the Monday syndrome is a problem because come Monday, you will forget what we've said and you haven't done anything about it. It might have been a fun time together, but I want you to be able to actually do something. So when you come out of our video together, you are changing the way you're thinking, feeling, and doing. And a little bit about myself. I'm a corporate anthropologist. I specialize in helping people and organizations change. And I apply the methodologies and tools and theory of anthropology to help you step out and see the world through a fresh lens. My job is to help you see, feel, and think in new ways. And that's my job for today. So Elia, please, let's begin. Where should these folks begin to think about themselves in a new way?
First of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Nobody's ever introduced me as being delicious.
But in this world, that's how we feel.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And Coach Khan, it's always a pleasure to be with you, my friend.
Likewise, brother.
So
likewise.
we are living in uncertain times. We're living in unprecedented times and tumultuous times. At the very least, we're facing 4 crises simultaneously. We're facing, obviously, the pandemic and the impact that it's having, the mental health crisis, which we have an 800% increase of depression, anxiety, and stress mind you, these are people with no pre-existing condition. These are new people that have come into this depressive state, anxious state because of so many unknowns and stress beyond their minds. Then we have the financial economic crisis as the economy has shut down and is trying to restart itself awkwardly and then shutting down again, this back and forth, so much financial insecurity. And then we have the social and racial strife. So we have four at the same time, and that does not include anybody's personal crisis. So human beings are very resilient. We've overcome crisis before. Usually we can do one or two at the same time, but not four or plus four. So now people are overwhelmed, and leaders and people that have been very successful and have grown companies from startups to multi-million-dollar companies are at a loss of what to do. They don't know what to do. HR professionals, and Coach Khan and I have access to, a group of 15,000 HR professionals who, by their own account, these are not our, anecdotal statistics, by their own account say this: their biggest challenges that they're facing is, number one, ensuring the physical and mental well-being of their employees. That's number one. That has never been number one. In the history of corporate, not just America, the corporate world, ensuring the physical and mental well-being of their employees has never been number one or even top five. So that gives you an indication of what the world that we're facing right now. And then number two, maintaining employee productivity and effectiveness, which is obviously tied into number one. And number three, how to become successful working from home, because there's a huge percentage of people that will not come back to work in 2020 physically. They refuse to, until there's a vaccine that's been vetted, they're not coming back to work. So employees have to fix that immediately. Now, there's a company out there called Siemens, which is, as you know, a global Fortune 500 company from Germany, 380,000 employees, who I think hit the mark. This came out from their CEO just a couple of days ago, and it's a 2-sentence remote work policy that they, claim is the best they've ever heard. Listen to these two things, that this comes straight from their CEO. Number one, focus on outcomes rather than time spent in the office. In the office, of course, in quote, because the office is at home oftentimes. And number two, trust and empower your employees. Don't try to micromanage them remotely and think, well, they must be watching TV or playing with their kids, or they're not doing right. These 2 points put together make up a brilliant management strategy founded on emotional intelligence, the ability to make emotions work for you instead of against you. So kudos to them. So what can we learn from this giant company and the way that they're approaching this? I think is brilliant and simple, honestly. Trust your employees and focus on outcomes. Not if you're you've only spent 7.5 hours out of 8 in front of your computer. Let's dock you. Let's write you up on HR. No, if you deliver results, that's all that matters. If you're doing less than 8 hours a day, good for you. Then go spend some time with your kids and your spouse.
There are two things in what you said, though, for a leader. One is to empower your staff and trust them. And that's an interesting word, often unclear to people what the trust is. And then from the employee, how to manage myself now in a more amorphous fashion, where I can take responsibility and be accountable, a word that's often missing in my relations and the work that has to get done. There was a great story about a company, and the CEO tried to micromanage, just what they're saying not to. And he called and contacted and put processes in place. Nothing was getting done. So his folks said to him, leave them alone and let's see what happens. And they all finished the products that had to be done ahead of schedule with greater ease, excellent quality. Even my own clients are finding themselves doing emails at 10 o'clock at night. And I said, why? Well, I have to be busy. I have to be working. I said, who said?
You have to be
And they said,
productive. You have to be productive, not busy. There's two different things. Productive.
And that's what we were talking about. I said, is anybody expecting the email at 10 o'clock at night? No. Is anyone holding you accountable? No. I said, so let's manage our lives in a more sensible fashion. So as you're thinking about the wisdom there, are there 2 or 3 things in this transition time that I love that you talk about, that our folks begin to visualize what's happening? They're going through a process of change. But would you like Khan to talk about this bridge?
I would love Khan to talk about it.
Well, thank you. Thank you again, Andy, for having us here. And thank you, Dr. Elia. So let's talk about this bridge. Essentially, what we're referring to here is what we call a leadership paradox. CEOs are finding themselves in a situation right now where they have to find answers to problems that perhaps are very different than what they've had to deal with in the past. So a lot of the answers that they had ready to go and a lot of the proven strategies in the past may not be directly applicable here, and they're finding themselves naked in this moment. So they're turning to experts like you, like me, like Dr. Elia for answers in this case. So what we're finding is we're dealing with what we're calling the leadership paradox right now.
Yeah.
On one hand, they're being asked to empower and trust their workforce, but on the other hand, they're required to provide a structure so people don't burn out. So now we're dealing with this. On one hand, how do you become that parent from afar? And on the other hand, how do you become that encouraging person, that mentor on the other hand? So now it requires us to really change that perspective. One of the key things that CEOs, leaders at all levels, and individuals are required to tap into is their growth mindset. They're going to have to think about multiple things at the same time now in order to be able to juggle that conflicting or seemingly conflicting thoughts. In the past, 20 years ago, Andy, we started exploring that in corporate America about how can we have a remote workforce. Two of the elements that we found were missing back in those days. The first one was trust from leadership. The second one was technology. So we were trying to bridge that gap 20 years ago and looking at that piece. And what we found was there was a lack of trust from management because they didn't understand. They were still measuring people's performance based on how many hours did you spend. We wear it as a badge of honor. I spent 120 hours working this week. We're going to die trying this and it'll be on our tombstones. But he worked 120 hours this week.
And they would log it. They would measure to see when did you log in at 6:35 a.m. and when did you log off from your computer. They were trying to measure productivity based on how. You could have your computer turned on and be outside.
Well, I'm going to run some errands right now. So the ridiculousness of that thought, you think about that. Study after study shows that at best, even in the office environment, you're not going to get more than 4.5 hours of productive time out of the office. When you factor in meetings, water cooler discussions, interruptions, the unexpected, all of those different things. So that's basically what we're talking about. But now if you ask your people, if you empower them to say, look, here's what we need to get done in this amount of time, people can manage it. Now, if I'm a parent and if I'm trying to homeschool my kids, I'm trying to do all these different things, I need to be able to find those pockets of time when I can execute that stuff. And it might be between nap time of the kids, or you know what, I gave them a chance to kind of watch a movie a little bit so I can get on my computer. Parents have the ability to multitask from that piece, and they're finding ways of doing it. On the other hand, the technology is finally catching up. Look at us here. The three of us are having a real discussion as if we're in the same room.
Yes.
Because of the ability of this technology to help us. So
we're in the Zoom room. We're in the Zoom room.
Well, and we're Zoomers.
There you go.
But Con, as you've worked with organizations and as I have, there's nothing more unsettling than change. So, I specialize in helping organizations change. And the first thing the brain does is create pain and put me in a closet and hope I don't come out. And I used to tell them, if you want to change, have a crisis or create one. And so I got it, the crisis. And I always preach, don't waste it. So from your perspective, the leadership paradox is an opportunity to rise above what you've always done. What you did in the past is not going to help you necessarily in the future, might.
Right.
But now we need some new skills. So as you're thinking about it, I know in your book you began to lay out the skill set. Begin to tell us, what are the first 2 or 3 things you've got to begin to do to make this work for you? I don't want to, it's, I think, important that the listeners realize that there's a process here of transformation.
Right.
Your thoughts, Con?
And it starts, as we have in our book, with that first key. Dr. Elia alluded to it. It's self-care. You're not going to be able to help your team or help anybody else in your immediate circle if you are not in a good place. So start by looking at self-care from that perspective, identifying where am I at, and look at the whole person from that perspective. We have an assessment in the book, a health assessment, a very simple one that looks at 4 pillars of our well-being. It looks at the physical health that we have. It looks at our mental health. It looks at our emotional health. And ultimately, it looks at our spiritual health.
Yes.
Regardless of religious background or lack thereof, there is a spirituality about human beings that we need to understand, a faith, a belief, if you will, of what we're doing. And that becomes the starting point for us to look at. So we start at the beginning of this journey by assessing, where am I at right now? And through the book, we try to provide answers to that piece and help you improve in all of those different areas. So we start with that. We assess where we're at. We look at our own self-care. And then we transition into the next key, which is awareness and looking about how we feel. We've talked about that repeatedly. Even the fact that we wrote the book, it started by listening to our voice. Dr. Elia can speak to that in a minute, of how he got inspired to write this book and invite me along for this journey from that piece. And that's been a wonderful thing. But it starts with quietening the environment around us, closing our eyes for a moment and saying, what's going on? How am I
Don't lose
feeling?
that thought, because a quiet mind can listen and hear things. When it's all agitated and trying to put things together, the emotions take over and you can't. But I want to dig deeper into this, because there are 2 things. One, Dr. Elia, yes, share how you came up with this. But 2, when you do the self-awareness, you also find different types of personalities.
Yes.
And I do think that people need to know that they aren't all the same. And your personality is something that's going to influence what you hear from us, how you act on it. And this is self-awareness part, self-care, but also an awareness. Share with us.
So, middle of March, the pandemic is in full, force in Europe, certainly from China, and it's coming to the United States, and things are shutting down left and right. I had a very strong, and it actually fell on March 15th, in Shakespeare, beware the Ides of March. So it's a very symbolic, that's why I remember, it's a very symbolic day. And whether you call it, your inner wisdom, your intuition, that still small voice inside, whatever it is, as loud as I'm talking to both of you right now, it said, Elia, you need to write a book about the pandemic to help people, and you need to get it out in 45 days. Now, mind you, my first book, it took me 3 years to write. I'm like, that's crazy. I can't write a book in 45 days. That's insane. But the feeling was very strong. I picked up the phone immediately, and I talked to my best friend. I'm like, tomorrow morning, got to start writing a book about the pandemic. Are you in or are you out? And he didn't hesitate a second. He goes, I'm in. In the next 45 days, heads down, we worked as hard as we've ever worked. In May 1st, we got the ebook out, and about May 10th or whatever, we got the hardcover out. So if that would not have happened had I not gotten very quiet, because the 4 personality types that you alluded to forced me to that place to get quiet. Basically, and this is true for anybody, the first personality type we call the victim. And the victim is, why is this happening to me? Oh my goodness, what? It's all about me. Never mind that it's happening to 7 billion people. Why is this happening to me? And I go down to depression, and I'm anxious about it, and I'm all stressed out because it's all about me. That's number 1. Number 2 is the critic. And the critic, of course, it doesn't matter what the federal, state, or local government, what the World Health Organization, even the United Nations says about this, they'll criticize anything. For example, Andy, you should wear a mask when you go outside. Well, that's stupid. Okay, Andy, never wear a mask when you go outside. What, are you crazy? You want me to get sick? Like, no matter what happens, they criticize everything. Then we get to what we like to call the bystander. Now, the bystander, mind you, is a good person, but the deer with the headlights look, that's the best way to describe the bystander. Does not know what to do, overwhelmed by all these changes that are coming, all these announcements from the government, so on, that seem to change on a weekly basis and not on a daily basis, and paralyzed by fear, in essence. So looks to the left, looks to the right, looks to see what the neighbors are doing, but they don't do anything. And the point of the first 3 personality types is this: they don't offer any solutions. They don't move forward. And then we get to the 4th one, which we'd like to call the navigator, which is the premise of this whole book. And the navigator, like Coach Khan said, begins with self-care. Like, I have to take care of myself physically, emotionally, mentally, and so on, in order to progress and to navigate successfully. Then I'm aware, I listen, I practice flexibility and adaptability, which Coach Khan can talk about that at length. Leaders, we cannot go through this crisis and be successful in navigating it by doing things that we used to do in the past. If you think you can rely on what you did in the past that you made you successful and be successful through this, you're sadly mistaken. I'm sorry. We have to be flexible and adaptable continuously. And organizations that are flexible and adaptable not only will survive this crisis, but will thrive.
Well, now
So back to the navigator, one more, they
yes,
prepare, they take initiative, they move into action, they have a positive attitude. This too shall pass. We will
yes.
be, we'll get through this and we'll be better off for it.
So what we're basically saying to our CEOs who are watching and the leaders out there is you need to take a look at yourself. Were you a deer in the headlight? Or were you really the critic, which is so easy? I have a client who is a fast critic. Everybody else, whatever they do or say is wrong, but he hasn't figured out what he's going to do. And then I have another client who is the victim. And life was perfect, and now he's the victim of that. I actually have a woman client who's a navigator. In fact, I'm finding a lot of women who are navigating. I'm not going to say women are navigators, but they're very lateral thinkers, and they're very clever and creative. Elia.
Well, no, you can say, if you don't want to say it, I'll say it. If you look at the countries that have been successful in
Yes.
overcoming, or, they're all led by women. The prime ministers are all women. So
Yes.
There's something to be said about that. But
Germany,
I want to
New Zealand, Iceland, you're right.
Absolutely. So that's true. But one point that I'd like to make, Andy, is that all four of those personality types exist within each human being. In other words, when this first came out, I was the victim. All my speaking engagement across the world got canceled in 1 week. Everything was gone, poof, like that. And I was the bystander. Now what am I going to do? Like frozen in fear and uncertainty.
Yes.
I hate uncertainty. And have I been critical of the government from time to time? You're darn right I have. However, you don't want to stay stuck there. I can visit the victim camp or the bystander camp for an hour or two, pay a visit, tip my hat and leave, and then go and navigate. I don't want to build a condominium building in victim mode or critic mode, because if I'm critical all the time, that takes away from my own personal happiness. And to me, happiness is the greatest thing in the world. Like Aristotle said 2,500 years ago, happiness is the whole meaning and purpose of life, the whole essence and aim of human existence. That's it. So for us to be happy, we have to navigate. And Con, it's up to you now. Take it from here.
Well, how'd you know what I was thinking? Because I don't want to lose the happiness message. We'll come back to that. Because what you're saying is that if we're going to go from sad to happy, we're going to have to go from being victimized, letting that victimized stuff, to becoming someone in control of the unknown and uncertainties, which for humans is very unsettling, but very possible. Con, how do we help them do that? If I was an HR director or the middle manager of some place, I mean, give us some of the tools to begin to turn navigation into something I can do.
Okay, well, let's start first of all about, as Dr. Elia said, all of these different modes, if you will, these personalities come out, and they come out in the same person. And we can even start as a navigator and may find ourselves, due to obstacles or a moment or fatigue, drifting into victim mode or critic mode or bystander mode. So for all of us, these coexist at any given time inside us. The question is, and you understand this as a change expert as well, is identifying what's triggering this reaction to me. There is typically a trigger associated with putting us into one of these states of mind. So when we talk about that awareness piece, it is truly about quieting the mind down, saying, okay, what puts me in this mode? When do I start feeling like a critic? What is it that I'm missing? Is it because I don't feel like I have any control over my decisions, or somebody else is deciding for me and it's forcing me? When am I a victim? Is it similar to that, but you know what? I don't have a say in this, or I don't have enough information. Once you identify what's triggering you, then you can go out and figure out how to get that, what the piece that's missing. You don't just automatically snap your fingers and become a navigator. You become a navigator because you do certain things and you start triggering yourself in a positive way. The little things of taking control, or as Dr. Elia mentioned, switching your mindset a little bit to look at the problem differently. These are small things that we coach our clients through to go through this process. Once they identify where the problem is, now what's the solution? The solution becomes much more evident when you clearly define the problem. And even when we're looking at things from that perspective, Andy, it's, as I look at the situation as a whole, what am I looking at? Am I looking at a situation that represents danger, real danger? Or am I looking at a situation that I'm reacting to what I think it is and I'm being fearful. I
Yes.
get into that fight or flight mode. Danger is real. When you're confronted with a situation, that's real. If somebody is around you who's sick and you're not taking protection against that, you're not wearing a mask, they're not wearing a mask, that's real danger. You could get infected from that piece. If you are a CEO or a leader and you're looking at the situation and your work, your pipeline of work is drying up, that's real. But me reacting to it in a fearful way and panicking and firing half of my workforce or shutting things down without thinking this through, that's a fearful reaction to a dangerous situation. So we need to look at that and really understand that. That comes through the awareness. And I know that people need to really clarify that. But once we get into the flexibility piece, now this is a different key. This is that growth mindset that we talked about. We bring a parable to illustrate that point. We talk about oak tree versus a palm tree.
Yes.
Most leaders, especially, when we ask them, which one do you associate with most, an oak tree or a palm tree? Most of them will say, absolutely an oak tree. Big, sturdy, strong, immovable almost.
We've
It's
all
11.
had that. They love being oak trees.
They love being oak trees. But what happens with an oak tree in a severe storm, in a crisis, or as Dr. Elia mentioned, that we're dealing with right now, when the wind is blowing, when there's so much rain, all of this stuff is happening all at once, and it's pounding down on that oak tree. The very thing that makes it strong is the same thing that makes it vulnerable from this piece.
Yes.
Limbs break. Even the tree might topple itself. But what happens with a palm tree? And those people, those leaders that live in those coastal areas where palm trees are prevalent can see that. Even in the worst of hurricanes, you see that palm tree. It may come all the way down. It adapts to the way that the elements are hitting it.
Yes.
And at the end of the storm, what happens? It comes up. If anything, its roots got stronger and deeper by holding on from this. It learned from that experience, and now it's adapted. It's become flexible and prepared for that next environment. And that's essentially a big part of what we're talking about now. Flexibility is key. Growth mindset is key for leaders at this point in time. It is the flexible and adaptable that will survive and thrive. With many clients, I've coached them through this process. I've had executive meetings with them when we've talked about this and said, okay, how are we doing? They're barely holding on. But by the end of the discussion, they're realizing that they actually can turn this into a competitive advantage.
Yes.
The fact that they're handling the pandemic well can become a selling point for other clients. For example, some of my clients in the construction industry right now, they're looking at it saying, we build, we do these things, but how do we move forward? Well, if you can show a school board how well you've handled your job site and how secure and safe it is and how your people continue to operate in a healthy way, they'll let you into the school to do that construction piece around kids. So these are examples where you can turn a seemingly problem area into a competitive advantage.
Right.
Now,
And that's the flexibility.
but I want you to go back to one thought and emphasize it a little bit. And that is, it's a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset.
Correct.
And a growth mindset is something, remember, we can manage our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And the agility, the image of the tree bending is changing that mind from I'm an oak tree that's fixed but strong to somebody who's very flexible, agile, and able to come up with creative solutions that may or may not be the right ones forever. But we've got a period of time now for us to try new ideas, to your point, and to take that, the strength that you got from managing your folks during this period and using it as an asset. And I don't want to lose the fact that you're selling yourself, your mind is changing its story, which is exactly how it sees reality, right?
Because it's all about our perception. I mean, our perception becomes our reality. The mind is a very powerful thing. And this is, again, that difference between danger and fear. Yes. Our reaction is based on our perception. If we look at this crisis as an opportunity to do things differently, then that becomes a very powerful tool for us to open up our mind, to look at it almost like that blue ocean thinking, Andi, that you talk about so vividly at times, where rather than trying to compete for crumbs on this side, we can open up a whole new environment.
I'm with you.
in the past, crises have shown us many different things. There are industries and businesses that did not exist prior to, let's say, the 2008 recession. Uber didn't exist. Airbnb did not exist.
Yes.
These are industries that blossomed as a result of the previous crisis. There is evidence here that we can turn a difficult situation into an opportunity, but it starts with our mindset and how we approach that.
It also starts with what Elia was talking about, with trust and empowerment of that team out there who have enormous creative possibilities. Elia, how would you like to follow up on Khan's thoughts? Because I'm watching your face and I know there's some stuff coming through here. Well, which part shall we dig deeper into?
Well, I wanted to talk about a little bit about, if you have any skepticism about this parable about the oak tree and the palm tree and about flexibility and adaptability in the corporate world, I want you to think about any elite athlete, regardless of the sport, whether it's track and field or a football game or basketball or baseball. What do they do half an hour before the game starts? They're out there in the field doing what?
Stretching.
They're stretching.
Yes.
Exactly. Because if they don't stretch, even though these are powerful, they've lifted weights, they're the elite, the best of the best, guess what happens to them if they don't stretch? And when they play the game, they pull a hamstring and they get injured.
They must be all the Mets who have all kinds of pulls, and they're blaming it on not having a spring training session,
Right.
not enough stretching, but it's true.
But and you know what's interesting? As sports are beginning to open up again now, because they've been shut down for 2 or 3 months, and they're beginning to play the games because they haven't had the normal preparation. We're seeing increasingly more injuries happen.
Yes.
Because they haven't stretched as much, and the stretching, of course, is both physical and symbolic. So we cannot overemphasize enough how important that is, that to have that kind of growth mindset and be flexible and say, you know, I know that what made me successful and what brought me to this point is X, Y, and Z. Guess what? Now you have to do Q, S, and F.
Well, and there's another gap, and I want you to think about this in the conversation as well, and that is the habits drive us. The brain is a habit-driven organ, and it loves not to think. It's work when you have to think about something new, whether it's a new golf swing or a new way to deal with a remote workforce, or be an HR person to think about benefits in a new way. Those are all unfamiliar, right, and they make us uncomfortable. What if I make the wrong move? But as you're thinking about it, how do we build new habits so that they become the way we do things? And agility is a habit. It's a way of seeing things. So Elia, as we're thinking with them out loud about how to navigate on the one side, be agile on the other, go through this transition so that unfamiliar becomes familiar. When I preach about your job is to take the unknown and make it known, take the unfamiliar and make it familiar, and then all of a sudden your brain will stop fighting you and embrace it. Some thoughts, please.
Well, I think when we go back to their biggest challenges that they're facing, and if the number one is ensuring the physical and emotional and mental well-being of their employees, that has to be paramount. Not only, offering mental health and bringing in experts like a corporate psychologist or corporate anthropologist to the workforce or coaches, but people don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yes.
We know that. Much more so now than ever before. So that's the approach. We have to say, not only how are you doing today to an employee, because most, and especially here in America, people say, I'm doing fine. Everybody's doing fine all the time, no matter what they,
even if they're depressed, anxious, and fearful.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, let me close the door for a minute and then lean into them and say, how are you really doing? And how's your family? And have you lost anybody, or has anybody been sick? And what can we do as your employer to make your life more successful, whether you work at home or you come in, or there's a hybrid in between? Because employers right now need to step up their EI, their emotional intelligence. As leaders, we have to step up and be better than ever before. More empathy, more compassion, more understanding. Take that extra, how long does it take to actually ask that second question, how are you really doing? And then listen and get quiet and allow them maybe even to vent for a little bit. Yes. And then after the vent, it's like, okay, well, what can I do to help you? These are simple things that anybody can do. It just takes some awareness and conscious thinking that this is how I need to approach everybody else, because the workforce is already traumatized. Yes. People need to understand that. They're already going through PTSD.
Well past stress. This is trauma.
Exactly. It's exactly. So unless you address that first, saying we need to hit the numbers, of course we need to hit the numbers. But you have to explain the why,
Yes.
because if we don't hit the numbers, I'm afraid at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, I'm going to have to lay off 20% of my workforce. You're part of my family. You and your spouse and your kids and your significant, they're important to me. I don't want to lay anybody off. That's why we have to hit the numbers, not because I want to get an extra bonus at the end of the year. It's about survival right now.
Well, it's an interesting time for corporate wellness to rethink their role in how they are thinking about this. This isn't an afterthought. This is, if Siemens is right, this is the thought.
This is the thought.
Right. And it's very interesting. As you know, I've a number of questions that have come to us as we've been building this program. So I'm going to ask you guys them and let you, really begin to pull it apart a little bit. I want to go back to happiness in a moment, but one of them is how do I handle a remote workforce most effectively? Elia, one thing, and then Con, one thing, and then we can think out loud a little bit about it. What is the most important thing that somebody should start to do when their workforce is now all separated and not in the same office space?
I'm going to go back to Siemens. What they said is like, look for outcomes, not how much time they're spending in front of the computer, and trust and empower your employees. I think, rather than me coming up with something, when you read something and that makes a lot of sense, I'm good for them for doing that.
Good.
So whether it comes from Germany or it comes from any other country, I don't care where it comes.
Right.
This is a brilliant strategy about helping people. So I'm going to go back to that.
I agree. And the listener should think through what's the risk in doing that? You said something else, is that lean in and say, how are you doing? That builds, that's a how to build that emotional empathy. When you say, I feel your pain, isn't that I'm sympathetic to it, but I understand it. Con, something to add to that? Because that's.
Well, I'll add into this piece. Between there's a big space between micromanaging, as you referenced, with the supervisor that's constantly calling and checking in. Are you working? Are you working? Are you working? To the supervisor that hasn't touched base with their remote workforce in 4 months.
Yes.
There's a lot of space in between there.
I love that, but it's true, and I've seen it.
So, and again, that's part of the reaction of somebody trying to control the issue that's not controllable to somebody who's a deer in the headlights and has no idea what to do. There is a lot of space for us to be able to operate. To Dr. Elia's point, the example from Siemens is a beautiful one in the sense that work with your people to find how they can be productive and focus on those outcomes as opposed to the time that they spend in front of the computer. But also set the parameters, create an environment where you can provide as an organization, you want to be able to provide any practical help. For example, be able to expense getting a printer, getting a piece of equipment that they need to be able to do their job, giving them some best practices, some how-tos about how to set up an office, what might work, setting certain guidelines as a team. Not just creating a platform like Zoom or another one or Teams or anything else where people can collaborate, but also setting up the parameters saying, okay, I don't expect an answer now. It's 10 o'clock at night. I'm putting it out there for the team to pick it up next morning. And now we're looking at an asynchronous environment where now we can manage our workforce very differently and understanding that time is very relevant. You will insert your piece here. I will come pick it up from there when I start my day, because my day may start at 10 o'clock at night when I put the kids to bed. And all of a sudden, from a very practical standpoint, I'm managing a workforce that, again, has a very different mindset, is not expected to always be operating at the same time and in the same physical space. Simple things that we can do. But again, stay connected without necessarily being together all the time.
Con, that leads, though, to the loneliness factor. My clients, they were all lonely. So I appreciate Siemens, and I appreciate it from a business perspective. I love Dr. Elia leaning in, but how do people stop the loneliness, particularly the folks who one was married, the other was married, and the third one was a single, but they are articulating this loss of being around folks, having a beer with folks, just chatting. I mean, the need for social. Humans are social animals, and they are really lonely. Some thoughts, some how-tos, perhaps.
I think doing what we're doing right now, I feel more connected to more people across the globe, not just here in America right now, to speak, because is it the same, Coach Con and I, we're Greek. I know you love Greece. We love to hug people. We love to be that physical connection. Very, very important to us. That my number one love language. ask my wife. So, but when we're not able to do that, reach out and connect to people. This is when I'm going to go back to awareness. Sometimes you have to listen, and when you hear the message, take action. At the early start of this pandemic, I had a very strong impression to reach out to a friend of mine. We've been friends for decades in Greece, and she's a professor at a university there, has a master's degree from USC, actually. I mean, American. I mean, back and forth. Great lady. Anyway, I got an impression to call her. I called her up on the phone, and I said, her name is Elena. I said, "How are you doing?" She goes, "You know something? I haven't seen a human soul or touched anybody for 10 days because I've got asthma. I have to withdraw from my adult kids. They were living together, and I'm by myself in this apartment, and I don't plan on going out for 45 days. And she says, I'm really struggling." Now think about this, not to see or touch another human being for 45 days. If that, it doesn't break your heart.
Yes.
And she said, it's funny that, because initially I didn't even know why I was calling her. I just got the prompting to call her. She goes, I said, "Listen, Eleni, I'm going to be calling you every single week to check in on you." And she goes, "Thank you so much for doing that." And I have. Now she's gotten better. She's gotten out, and the society has opened up in Greece a little bit more. But the first 45 days were so hard.
Yes.
So going back, this is not just about your employees. This is about your friends.
Yes.
Your extended family. You get a prompting, don't ask why. Pick up the phone, get on Zoom, FaceTime, do face-to-face, say, "I miss you, I love you, I wish I could be there to hold your hand." Some empathy, love, kindness. And sometimes knowing that we're being thought of by somebody else is enough to get us through the day.
Yes.
Maybe not get us through the week, but at least get us through the day. Compassion, humanity. And I see a lot of that, though, by the way. And I want to remind people that the seventh key to navigating a crisis is kindness.
Yes, I was going to hope you said that.
No,
because kindness makes our well-being better. We need to be kind.
And when we practice acts of kindness, even remotely, or acts of service, that makes us happy.
Yes.
So, and then happy people by nature, they tend to do kind things anyway because they're happy and their batteries are full. So with kindness and happiness, you can't have one without the other. So we must practice kindness. It's good for us as the giver, but it's also good for the receiver.
Con, how about yourself?
Well, I echo those same sentiments, but I think it's important for us to distinguish between loneliness and being alone.
Yes.
They are two very different things. I know people that feel lonely in a crowd. So it's important for us to separate that. And then I can be alone over here in my part of the world, in my little room, my little Zoom room. You are all the way across the country, Andy. But we don't feel lonely right now because we're connecting. So to Dr. Elia's point, you can still connect with people. You just may have to find it in a different way. You look at the statistics. Adoption of pets has gone through the roof.
No,
right now.
Shelters are empty.
No, they're empty. They don't have anything.
There's nobody to shelter.
I know they worked themselves out of a job. But that's part of what we can do to find a supplement. It's not the same replacement if I can't hug my loved ones. But you know what? Adopting a lovely pet, having a new addition to the family from that piece can physically give me something that can enhance my well-being from that perspective. Or even just taking care of a plant or something that I can focus on, that I can pour my kindness and my love into.
Yes.
Something that can give me something back from that perspective. From a professional standpoint, again, having the opportunity to say, you know what, hey, this is a Zoom meeting for work, but you know what? Let's have a virtual happy hour after 5.
Yes.
And change use this technology in different ways to connect with people. I'm having virtual coffee with friends that I haven't seen in years.
We are also, and we're having Zoom family time.
I know.
And my kids would never have allowed us to do Sunday Zoom family, and they're all across the country.
But we make the most of what we have. And again, that's part of a positive attitude about how we define the problem. Rather than saying, I can't see my loved one, we turn that around from a positive attitude, which is another one of our keys, and saying, how can I do that? Yes. Yeah, it's not the same, but how can I do that in such a way? And part of that may require us to, another key, which is preparation, to set things up. Do I need to get a new laptop, or can I get a new little camera for my equipment? Or, you know what, I'm in a bracket, I'm in a situation where I don't have internet access. What can I do? Can I pick up the phone? Can I hear a friendly voice? What is it that I need to do? Prepare for that, and then take control of the small things. Take initiative. by
Yes.
that another key that gives us some sense of empowerment, even in our little world, removes us from being a critic or being a victim or a bystander. That little semblance of taking some control over things makes you a navigator. It helps
Yes.
you get back on track.
So if I hear us, these are challenging times, of course,
Mm,
but that doesn't mean you have to be challenged.
correct.
And you can turn the danger not into fear, but into opportunities and possibilities.
Mhm,
But you need to do something.
mhm,
First, you have to manage your mind and lean in and and begin to think through how can I help you? Because the act of kindness, while maybe the seventh is actually probably the first, is something that will give you great pleasure, and you don't realize it yet, but your well-being will go way up by communicating, but also by caring. And this is it's great. So this a little humility here is terrific. The second thing that we have to do is self-care. This comes together with it so that I can begin to look in the mirror and say, I'm taking care of myself. Dr. Elia?
So I have a big concern and a big red flag that we're finding out right now. People
Ah,
working from home are actually working more hours than they had in the past when they were working in an actual location at the work. So to me, that's very uh, upsetting in some ways. They're trying to overcompensate because they're in their pajamas or whatever. The kids are running around and screaming, so they don't feel like they're being productive
yes,
necessarily. So
I
they're
know. I've
overdoing
had
it.
several. Right.
Yes, and they're overdoing it. So part of your self-care or self-compassion is to give yourself permission to say, it's okay for me. I've sat here for 2 hours. Basically, work hard for 2 hours and then get up and take
A
half an
walk.
hour, 45 minutes, go for a
Yes.
walk, go outside,
Go
breathe the
play with the
fresh air,
kids. Right.
listen to the birds, look at the blue sky, um,
Yep.
get some physical exercise before. Don't sit in front of this, camera and computer. As much as I love you guys, I couldn't do that with you for the next 12 hours. you know, we need a break from that
Yes.
and eat healthy food. The part of the self-care, like I know these are common sense stuff, but as you both know, common sense is often not common practice,
Yes.
right? So get adequate sleep so you wake up refreshed in the morning. Do the moderate exercise. Manage your diet. Unfortunately, during this pandemic, drug use, alcohol, food, all
Yes.
the things that we used to escape before, we're escaping even more so now. Okay, well, these are not part of your self-care. They're the opposite. So we have to consciously make a decision. I'll give you a personal example, some self-disclosure. Before the pandemic, I used to go for a walk three days a week for an hour, 3 miles because I had to, because I'm getting older and I got to get some exercise. Because of the pandemic, because my own stress level has risen, now I'm going for a walk every single day, 7 days a week. I've been doing it for 4 months straight. I haven't missed a day.
Wow.
And now I do it because I want to. And I hope that this habit, like you said, create new habits during this, will stay with me long after the pandemic has left. And now I do it because I want to, because I know that it's good for my health.
Yep.
I have to take care of myself in order to take care of my clients, my family, extended family, friends, and so on. So
Con, you're smiling.
Uh, I totally agree with the doctor. And again, those are the pieces, they all fit together. At the end of the day, the 7 keys that we're proposing through our book and through to navigate this crisis and any crisis. Today, it's a global pandemic. Tomorrow, it might be the loss of a loved one or loss of a job or something, my personal crisis. But all of these, the message at the end of the day is there is hope. Here are some ways that you can build resilience on how to deal with things very practically if I'm an individual, and very practically, but also organically for a leader of an organization from that perspective. And follow these the simple instructions. There are answers. Everything that we're dealing with right now is a temporary thing. In Greece, we say there is nothing more permanent than the temporary. And from that perspective now, we can look at this and understand we're not going to go back to the way things were.
no,
It's just like 9/11 changed the way that we travel. We're never going to have that again. So stop pining about that and start creating the future that you want, because the best way to predict it is to create it. Create that next normal. Stay flexible and understand that that may change yet again. And that's part of what we're encouraging leaders to do. Stay in the moment, look at that, and understand that we're going to require that growth mindset, that flexibility to be able to be resilient and get ahead.
and one more thing, since we have so many things beyond our control, globally, locally, on the state level, and so on, ask ourselves, what do we control? And the number one thing that we definitely have control is the attitude in our own mind. So will I approach things with a positive attitude, or will I become the victim? If you want to be the victim, be a victim for an hour, not for 100 days. That's
You're
all.
welcome to vent. In fact, call us and we'll listen to you as
Exactly.
you pine away about oh me, oh my, because you got to get it out. Might as well vent it, right?
You do, but we'll help you pivot to become a navigator again. That's the point. And not that you should never feel like a victim or a critic or a bystander, but don't stay there forever. Do it for an hour, get out of your system. We can help you move, not only you personally, but your organization, because organizations can be victims too, by the way, just so you know. It's not just individuals. Move them from that to navigating successfully through this crisis and beyond.
You know, we're about ready to wrap up, but I want to put this into a context as an anthropologist, because Khan said we live the illusion of our perceptions. Our minds take the data and information, create a story. The story that worked yesterday isn't helping you live today, and all the stuff that's coming at you, you can't put into your mind. Your movie set doesn't know what to do with them. They all seem to be outliers, and you keep deleting them, but you can't delete it. It's here, whether we like it or not, whether it's remote work, remote living, quarantine, wearing face masks or not wearing face. I mean, the world has changed. So now we need a new story, and the mind can be controlled by us as we craft that new story. And it's important to be around other people, even if it's remote, who begin to share that story with you. And if you find people who are pulling you back to being the victim, say, thank you very much. I don't want to see you too often, until you become, with me, an agile creator of how can we find new ways to do things. So be careful that your story isn't being distorted by somebody else's story. And our minds change as we hear each other's stories, right?
Right.
So it's a very interesting time for humans. So I'm going to make sure you see this 7 Keys for Navigating a Crisis. Is this wonderful book by Dr. Elia Gourgouris and Khan Apostolopoulos, who I just really enjoy sharing our thoughts with those of you who are watching or listening today. And I hope that you not only buy the book, but think about the things you're going to do on Monday. Don't let there be a Monday syndrome. You know, I don't care whether it's 1 or 7. Acts of kindness are easy. Just do something nice for somebody and something nice for yourself. Stop thinking about yourself as a victim, but try to be that navigator. And if you feel anxious or lonely, that's okay, but then come out of it and tell your mind, okay, I got through that. Let's go take a quiet walk. And quiet walks are the best time for your brain to be creative, right?
Yes.
Right? The mind quiets down and the creativity goes up 60 or 70%, and all of a sudden ideas come flowing. The brain is this great thing that's waiting to help you come out of this and your company. To Dr. Elia's quote from Siemens, this is a time to trust your employees, empower them, and care about their health and well-being. And if you're an HR director, think about the benefits. You know, tuition reimbursement isn't important now. Mental health care, it might be. It's a great time to care and the acts of caring. I hope you've all enjoyed it. We certainly have enjoyed sharing with you. And I'm going to say goodbye and tell you that there are more to come. Some are going to be on how to build teams with remote work. Some is going to be about the racial divisions and the bridges and how to create them. But this is a time for us to even think about Zoom and LinkedIn. And we will be trying to help you address that Zoom fatigue you're feeling. It's not really Zoom fatigue. It's a time to think about it in a new way. It's social in a whole different fashion. So as Zoomers, we only want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us. Please stay well and take care. Bye-bye now.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it. Thank you.